So I am the director of O Sports, which is a sports architecture practice within Osborne Engineering. Osborne Engineering is in Cleveland, Ohio. I was provided the opportunity to go anywhere I wanted when I left. I happened to grow up in Tampa, St. Pete area, went to USF Architecture School with that dude right there 20 years ago, and which is pretty awesome. But Osborne, they started as a structural engineering firm. Frank Osborne was an architect and an engineer, and he literally did the original Yankee Stadium, the original Notre Dame, the Polo Grounds, Cleveland Municipal, so a lot of old stuff, right? A lot of old stuff. And then here's what's really funny. Like, the dude had a heart attack. It's not funny, he had a heart attack. He had a heart attack and he passed away. But he didn't mentor, and he didn't cultivate the architectural practice within the firm. So the firm has been around since 1892, just did what they did best and did what they were comfortable at doing, and they just continued doing engineering, right? And then they left this whole portfolio that they had on the table, where I didn't endorse the introduction, by the way. I think Populous, the firm I just left, is the greatest sports architecture firm in the country. No offense, HOK, but they're awesome too. But the moral of the story is Frank just didn't, he wasn't foreseeing the future, and he wasn't endorsing it. So, they have sports architecture, but it's kind of been dormant for a long time, and now I have the opportunity to grow it and develop it and do it with great people like you. So 100 plus years old, a lot of cool projects, a lot of cool opportunities, and that experience has been propelled by these 4 dynamic companies. Like, I've had the esteemed pleasure of working for those companies, like, for an enormous amount of time. Over 18 years, those are the 4 companies I've worked with, and they're tremendously creative people and forward thinkers. So I think everything you see in here is due to these 4 entities, so I just want to give them proper credit and respect, because it really has become a really killer opportunity. Opportunity where I've done soccer stadiums for Orlando City Soccer, one of my hometown delights, FAU football stadium in Boca Raton, the Joslin Center at Disney, which is in the right corner. Even more utilitarian type projects like NASCAR and for Talladega, spring training complexes and dormitories and resident buildings for players. And then the one in the bottom left is really amazing. That's the Jacksonville Jaguars amphitheater and covered flex field in Jacksonville, Florida, which we're going to highlight, because there's a lot of, that's where this whole thing started for me. And so before I get into that, so the learning objectives, even though the title says faster stadiums using Modular, that's kind of just the tagline that kind of sets up the story. But what we're talking about is the new process-oriented delivery, right? We're talking about how we can leverage our construction managers, our engineers, and technology and architects systematically, so it makes our life and our projects better. So we're talking about a new way to project deliver projects. We're talking about modeling. We're going to talk about how we model, or how I think that there's some efficiencies and waste in modeling. And we're going to talk about why I think team is universal. I don't think team should ever again be, and I don't think in 3 years a team will be an architect, engineer, contractor, and supplier. I truly think that's ridiculous. And then the discover options is a particular option. I'm going to show you a case model of 1904 FC, which is a soccer stadium concept in San Diego for an emerging market. So we're going to highlight that. All right. So I alluded to the Jacksonville Jaguars, so the covered flex field. So this really started like this, the idea of me kind of being aware of something that I normally wasn't aware of, which is my affection for like using technology differently, or taking a step back and thinking about how project delivery works. I have been a project manager for a long time at Populous, so I'm, for Orlando City Soccer, I was the project architect and project manager, one of the project managers. So you started to cross-pollinate roles and responsibilities. But we did this project for the Jacksonville Jaguars where, anybody from Jacksonville? No? Okay, that's a bummer. So Shad Khan, the owner for Jacksonville, said, first of all, playing football in the summer in Florida is almost impossible without being rained out or lightning or cancellations. So they've been working really hard they worked really hard to come up with the resources to build an indoor training center. So the indoor training center which was a full-size practice facility inside of a bubble, right? That's what they call them. And then Shad was like, well, I'm not going to make any money spending, $25 million or $45 million on an indoor practice facility. How can I generate revenue from building a practice facility? So Shad Khan is a self-made billionaire. He's from Pakistan, very forward-thinking. Went to Champaign, Illinois. Went to an technology institute, and he ended up creating a company through industrial design. He ended up creating a company called Flexingate, which, if anyone owns a pickup truck, it's the bumper, the step in the bumper where the trailer hitch goes. He makes every bumper in the country, and he has a patent on it, and he's made billions doing that. So he was like, well, if I build a covered flex field, what can I do to it to make it sustainable? What can I do to it to make it generate revenue? He's like, the city of Jacksonville doesn't have an amphitheater. What if we created a boutique amphitheater that was 5,000 to 6,000 seats, and we sandwiched that in between the covered flex field and the football stadium, and then we could generate opportunities where you could sell a suite ticket on Sunday for a football game, or a suite ticket on Friday for a concert, or sell a ticket three ways and sell it to cross-pollinate, to go to both events. So literally between the amphitheater, so the amphitheater is the interstitial area between the stadium and the covered flex field. And it's a 6,000 seat amphitheater, and then it's opened up to the covered flex field. So here's where the problem is. So building design and construction, everybody knows who BDC is. If not, they're a great source. They wrote a story in 2017, and it's called Software Cornucopia, because Shad is also a billionaire, so he obviously knows he can't park his money over a long period of time, so you have to be quick and efficient about it. So he gives us the ultimatum to do this project, a $65 million project that encompassed the practice facility and the amphitheater, and we had to do it in 14 months. 14 months from design and construction. Like, intense, right? So we ended up, the project team, and when I say we, this is where it starts to blend. We had a design, a CM at risk, so construction manager had a separate contract with the owner and the architect and the engineers. ME Engineers was our partner on that. And so we, the project manager, the superintendent for Hunt Construction, AECOM, and Populous, myself, we decided that we had to flip the script. We had to figure out a way where we could just eliminate shop drawings. We could eliminate, the RFI process. And so ultimately, what we did was, when we were confronted with a building that was highly ornate, because Shad's from a very international person. So what we ended up coming up with was the partie. Does anyone know what PTFE is? It's basically fabric, right? It's polyteflon coated fabric. So the whole roof is fabric. The walls are fabric. The structure's above below the steel, so that when you're inside the practice facility, it's just football. It's just 100% football. So there's a lot of detailed challenges with that. So every piece of steel up there is about 3,500 tons of steel, and every single one of them were different. So there was 24 lines of steel going in the north-south direction, and every one of them are different. So what we had to do is we had to figure out how we could streamline that process with the steel fabricator and the construction company in the process to conform to a schedule that was absolutely ridiculous. So I said 14 months, and 4 of those months were us going through design and engineering. The other 10 months was Hunt Construction trying to figure out how they're going to execute the project. So ultimately what happened is, if you look at the orange bar in the middle, all those diamonds are the milestones, right? Every project has milestones, every project has coordination issues, but what we had to figure out is how we blur the lines, right? So one of the things that we ended up doing, and this is the catalyst for everything for me, is we ended up, traditionally speaking, you have the architect draws, they submit the drawings to the contractor gives it to Banker Steel or the steel fabricator. They do their drawings, they send you back to shops, right? You get it. What we ended up doing is we identified how much money it was going to take for Banker Steel to do the shop drawings and the technical model and the detailing model, and that number was, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what Hunt Construction did was a GMP-based product. They gave back the client that money off the GMP, and then we wrote an ad service for that exact amount of money, we being the architects and the engineers. Walter P. Moore was the structural engineer. And we ended up taking the onus of the steel drawings and the detailing model and the fabrication model. okay? So tremendous amount of risk, right? Like everyone says, well, how the hell would you do that? And everyone's worried about like the whole risk and being sued thing. Well, if you really think about it, and it became, we had like an open conversation. If we're owning it and if we're accountable for it, where's the risk, right? Like we're doing it. We're responsible for it. So we were all very comfortable with that, even though populist attorneys were not, but they agreed to it. So we worked out some things, and Hunt Construction and populist attorneys had some really hard conversations. But at the end of the day, it formed a really, it flipped upside down the CM at risk and the architect-engineer relationship. So we were able to, while we were drawing, we were able to plan how that technology flow was going to work, right? And that was really important. So for us to get to the flow, we had to identify what software we were using, how we were going to use it, who's going to use it, and who's going to model what, right? So in this particular case, we used Revit and Rhino. We used Grasshopper, and then we used, obviously Tekla, right? So don't worry about the words, but basically, Populous designed the model with Rhino as the geometry. We used Dynamo and Grasshopper to transport that into Revit to use native geometries. And then the Grasshopper script would then communicate back and forth with Walter P. Moore's model and then with Banker Steel for the Tekla model. So we were able to use one model, one script to kind of help us navigate that thing back, which was really, really effective, because ultimately what happened was we were able to control the steel model. Like we owned the steel model. It was one source, one whole. So we used some other things like Kangaroo and everything to kind of help with some modulation, because we had to do ponding. I said the fabric was on the bottom of the steel, which obviously there's waterproofing issues with that. And so, but quintessentially is the Revit, the Grasshopper, and Rhino, right? So this diagram is really awesome because although I didn't have anything to do with the authoring of the Grasshopper script, we all talk about BIM plans were a thing back then, right? Like everyone should have a BIM plan. But for us, we did have a BIM plan. But furthermore, what we had was we have a detailed delineation of how the Grasshopper script was worked, right? So it wasn't one person in the corner writing the Grasshopper script. We all knew where and how it was made, so that at any given point, it was understood what the process was, right? And we delineated what the PTFE roof is, the fabric, the primary, the bridget, and the V columns, because these are all things that we were having conversations about with Banker Steel to save money and time, right? The V columns are these really accentuated columns on the south facade, and so we wanted all this independent, right? So it was really important that we consolidated that effort so that we all understood it, because I think that it's another way that the team is more collaborative, right? And so it wasn't like I'm just relying on Andrew to do one thing and Tom to do the other thing. Like we all got it. We all bought into it. It was described. So what that allowed us to do was working from left to right. Right? The problem was the building, right? Like that was the issue. So we were able to go to this iterative process of so if you follow the white line for the info exchange, so we used, Revit and Rhino and Grasshopper to transfer the design, and then we used, Rhino and Grasshopper and Kangaroo again for that optimization, and then et cetera, just went around. But this was all of us, right? Walter P. Moore, ME Engineers, Populous, Banker Steel, and Hunt Construction all bought into this, and we subscribed to this, and it became a process, contracts aside, right? Now we did that because in the sports entertainment world, it's highly competitive. If Shad would have said, can you do this in 14 months? And we would have said, no, it'll take us 16 months, we would have been out the door, and the next firm would have came in, and they would have said yes, and we would have been done, right? So it was a product of trying to figure out how we do it. So this process was literally taped up, and it was in our office, and the project manager, the PA, and the predominant author of the Grasshopper script was all following these guidelines. So what that allowed us to do, and this is where it really gets, so this is literally a map of our project team, which we always affectionately refer to as like the London Underground map, because it's like all over the place. But Jacksonville Jaguars was the client. City of Jacksonville is up on the top left. They're the really half the money, right? Because the project came, I mentioned it was a $90 million all-in number, essentially. $45 million from the city and $45 million from the owner. So, there's line. The white lines represent contractual relationships in the fundamental sense. So the Jacksonville owned a contract with Populous. Populous owned a contract with Walter P. Moore, ME Engineers, and BMT Fluid Mechanics to help with the hydrology reports, the wind studies, and all that other stuff. And then all the way over at the end, we have IND in Jacksonville. You had Hunt Construction, which they're based in Indianapolis. And then underneath them, they had a contract with Banker Steel, which was the fabricator in Virginia. And then underneath them, you had Structure Flex, who was the personnel who provided the fabric, and they were in Kansas City in New Zealand. And then you had Arup in New York. So what ended up happening was really awesome, because even though you had Banker Steel and Structure Flex, who were subcontractors to the client or to the contractor, what we ended up having, we had offices, so we were based in Kansas City, and then the projects in Jacksonville, and Walter P. Moore's detailing and whatnot came from Tampa, and all the fabricators and detailers were in New Zealand. So we ended up creating a loop where, like, when we would draw, we'd update the Revit, the Grasshopper script and the Revit model. That would go into a Tekla model on the East Coast, and then they would refine that. They would send it to the detailers in New Zealand. They would work on it. By the time we woke up, it was an iterative process. We just kept going. And it was, then what ended up happening is we have advisory relationships and then just casual relationships. And it became that web of just chaos. But it wasn't chaos because we had that. And we knew the process. We knew where everyone came in. We knew who was modeling what and who was modeling when. So it was pretty interesting. So the key is, how do you clean that up, right? How do you avoid that potential chaos? Because that could have went wrong real fast, right? That could have got bad. And it wasn't fun. I mean, I literally had an ulcer one time and had to go to the hospital. And but it was pretty chaotic. And it was chaotic because that was it, right? So in the bottom left corner is our esteemed structural engineer, Walter P. Moore, sitting next to one of these grids. And I'm on the bottom right, looking at one of the V-column brackets. But it was us immersed in the process. It was Banker Steel and Walter P. Moore and Populous and ME Engineers and Arup. We were all immersed in the process, taking accountability and ownership. And I think that even though this is an enormous project and it kind of blurred the line, there's a lot of things to be taken from this and how we can better effectively implement projects moving forward. And we're going to get into that later. But you can see the steel, it was ridiculous. The building was 90% steel and fabric. Everything else was like concrete, essentially. But it was intense, and ultimately, we had 24 columns, and each one of these panels of fabric, these were all prefabricated and brought in site and dropped into site. So we were able to take each one of these panels, which they were 24 feet wide, so it was about 24 feet wide from primary to primary, and we went 52 feet, right? So it was a product of shipping. And fortunately, Jacksonville is on the St. Johns River, so there was conversations to be had about shipping and all that stuff. So we really, took because it was really simple, right? We're talking steel and fabric. That was it. So we were able to take a step back and say, okay, how do we do this untraditionally? How can we do this faster and safer? I mean, we had one point in the main amphitheater bowl, they would have, I think I counted one time, there was 24 booms, like cherry pickers in this thing just navigating. And it's like, how do you do that without getting somebody hurt in a confined space? And we decided, well, we work from the outside in. So then that's when Hunt decided to bite the bullet and start going and prefabbing these panels and lifting them and dropping them in place, as opposed to having somebody traditionally go in there and weld, and there was no welding on place. So my brother, does anyone know who McKinsey & Company is out of Dallas, right? My brother works there, and my brother's like a data nerd. And so he wrote this thing. He teaches at South by Southwest all the time. He's a computer programmer that was in architecture school, and he dropped out of architecture school because he couldn't draw, and he went into computers. And then now it turns out he would have been an amazing architect, right? Because like Grasshoppers would have been something he would have nailed, been really good at. But he has this thing that he talks about how your outsourcer's outsourcer is going to be a robot. Now I want to draw attention to the date. So he wrote that in 2013. And he always tells me, every time we talk, he's like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing to change your industry? Because it's going to be gone. So McKinsey & Company is, I don't know how to define them. Do you know them, Andrew? Like, they're like probably like the #1 data research clinic in the country, right? So yeah. And so they know. So they've identified like the 50 top industries that are going to be null and void in the next 5 years unless something radically different changes. architecture and construction's on that list, right? The way that we know it, at least. So I always come back to this because it's pretty interesting to me, because he's always talking about how Elon's doing all this stuff, and I happen to think Elon's amazing, but you know, he always busts my chops. So it really comes down to, like, are we evolving or dissolving? And I don't even know, like, why I'm here, to be honest. Am I here because I want to evolve, or am I here because I don't want to dissolve? So I don't know. Like, I asked that question. Like, we had a process meeting the other day, and I asked that question. That got a bunch of looks. Like, are you here because you don't want to dissolve, or are you here to evolve?
Evolve.
Yeah. So you know, so it's that, right? So I don't know. So we heard about Phil in the keynote. Said, how many people think they're going to do architecture in 20 years? And we all raised our hand. We're not going to do it if we keep doing it the same way. So for me, I don't want to be that guy. So I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and this is the scene from Up, the movie, where, like, he's hanging on to his historical love of his house and everything that he knows, and the world's changing around him, right? And then I look at that, and I think, holy shit, like, we live that. So I work for Disney. This is Fantasyland in Orlando. Okay, this was 2013. We worked on this project when I was at HKS from 2008 through 13-ish. It's a 13-acre expansion to the Magic Kingdom, but more importantly, this building in the middle, you see the green construction fence, is the roller coaster. It's the Seven Dwarf Mine Train. Has everyone been there? You have? Did you like it? Do you have kids?
I do not have kids,
All right.
but I am a child, and I love Disney.
Yeah.
I go all the time.
So,
It's a really good roller coaster.
so I got to do the whole theme park, or the whole thing, right? Like all this, and there were some other companies that did Ariel's thing. The moral of the story is we got to the point, and Seven Dwarf Mine Train was supposed to be Cinderella Chateau, where all this stuff happens, and then somebody at Disney literally raised their hand and says, well, you have Belle's Cottage, and you have Be Our Guest, and you have Gaston's Village, and the Little Mermaid, and Chateau's, Cinderella Chateau. Like, what's my son gonna do? And we're all like, holy shit, he's right. So literally, the whole park was supposed to be done at the same time. So what we found ourselves responding to the scenario, and Disney redesigned the whole thing, and they came up with Seven Dwarf Mine Train. So it ended up happening, Bart Malo Construction ended up building a coaster in a bottle. That's what we called it. The theme park was active. Like, we had to do everything in the theme park while people were walking around. And if you've ever been to Disney, they don't sacrifice experience. Like, that's just quintessentially not, you don't even see mechanical units. No offense to ME engineers, right? Like they hide everything. So we had to figure out ways to compartmentize things, how to build them off-site, bring them in. They literally, I'm not even joking, the back gate over here, the contractors would be able to come in for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night. They literally went on property in the donut, and that was it, you know? So it was like, holy, you know, this is interesting. Like, we have to figure out to be more sustainable in how we're thinking about how we design things, and we thought about the paneling and the mountains and all that stuff. So it's there. And then, most recently, we did a new soccer stadium for Orlando City Soccer. So that was done in 2015, 13, 14, 15. And I highlighted this building in a rectangle, and it's a church. And the church was literally right next door to the building. And aside from the fact why they didn't move is not the point. You can Google it and be entertained. But we literally had to be very, very conscientious of the mobilization of the building on that corner, how we got things in. And it was really interesting because it's like, you know, you go back to Mr. Frederickson and Up, and you realize we see that all the time. Our project sites are getting tighter. The staging areas are farther away. You know, the materials are different. So you have to be conscientious of how you're getting there. So after Jacksonville and after Orlando City, actually Fantasyland came first, then Orlando City, then the Jacksonville Jaguars. I happen to love soccer, so I really, really like soccer. That's the project type that I enjoy the most, and minor league baseball, just because they're more involved and they're more family friendly, I would argue. They're smaller, more boutique, more intimate. So I know a lot of people in the soccer world, and I chase soccer projects, all right? So in, I don't know, for like 2017, the 1904 FC, which is in San Diego, and their logo, 1904, is literally 19 because S is the 19th letter in the alphabet and 4 is D. That's what they went with. So they came to us and they said, well, they came to me and they said, well, we want a new building, but we don't know if we're going to have like a good fan base, right? We don't want to spend $120 million and we don't want to like build a 20,000 seat stadium as an emerging market trying to figure this out. Is there another option? Is there another option where we can build an experience, a football experience, soccer experience, without investing a tremendous amount of money? So they asked that question, and we're thinking about it. And then far right, the New York Cosmos. Anyone from New York? The New York Cosmos is a legacy team. They've been around since the 70s. Pele played for them. And their owner is also a billionaire. And he owns a company called Mediacom, which is the 4th largest telecommunications company in the country. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. I mean, he's a billionaire, so nothing's unfortunate. But it's like AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, enormous gap, and then Mediacom, right? So the point of the story is he was talking to me one day, and he says, they play in a baseball stadium. So a lot of minor league or USL or Division II soccer teams play in baseball stadiums, and it doesn't work because it costs too much to flip the field, build the field, and take the pitcher mound down, change the graphics, et cetera. Plus, they don't have the rights to concessions and merchandising and all that other stuff. So Rocco says, and he's like an Italian New Yorker. No, he's not like. He's Italian and he's a New Yorker. So he's like really, he's like Joe Pesci, right? Like it's hysterical. And he's like, I could build 10 of these things, but I don't want to. Could I build one good one for $20 million and, you know, in some fashion or form? So that conversation's happening. This conversation's happening. And then over here, Phoenix Rising, they go out and build a $6 million portable stadium, which I'm not getting into that, but it doesn't meet code. It's on the Indian reservation. But they changed, they did something unique, right? They like did something that nobody else was doing. And now they have a 10,000 seat soccer stadium that the Phoenix Rising play in. And, you know, it's like, okay, well, you know, they did something. Now they have a home. Now they have purpose. And then Midfield Press is a really cool media source. They do all kinds of innovative stuff about the evolution of the sport of America. They talk about why the U.S. did not make the World Cup last year, and we don't because the MLS is predominantly a business, right? They're not growing kids and they're not like teaching kids. So you know, there's all these conversations happen about building a farm system and a training academy and developing our youth to play proper football. And then, of course, we talked about 1904. So we'll park that for a minute. So again, $120 million, and that's easy. Like that's like Minnesota United was north of 200, LAFC was 250. I mean, these things are expensive, right? And it's for me as an architect who loves soccer, not everybody can afford that, and I respect that, and I think that there should be a way to use and leverage our digital practice, which. What's digital practice mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of tools. We have a lot of resources. To me, it's using those resources and implementing them any way we can, right? In a sensible and sustainable way. So, you know, again, so it's like, how do we do a soccer stadium for $20 million or $25 million? So this was a design. We're going to get into this a little bit because that's like the core at the end. But this is the design solution for a $20+ million soccer stadium in San Diego County for the 1904 FC, using offsite, prefabrication, and modular components. Now, if anyone knows anything about any of those things, all three of those things are very different, right? Modular construction is just building something in a volume of a certain descriptive size. Prefabrication would be like building a head wall in a hospital, which is super complicated and challenging. Probably, arguably, one of the hardest building types in the planet is a hospital. And then offsite construction is just physically that, right? So how do you converge all of that? And it doesn't have to be a full mod. It doesn't have to be the cold, dense relationship of a shipping container, which is what traditionally people think of when they think of prefabricated or modular construction, which they have their purpose. We can look out the window on the other side of the building, and all the construction trailers are shipping containers modified. And there are some good examples. If you've been to a Starbucks, drove through the drive-thru, and see two shipping containers welded together in the shape of a T, and you had no idea because it had a great skin on them, right? Like, so it's those kind of things that we have to take a step back and a little bit more optimistically think about how can we use sustainable objects. There are millions of shipping containers sitting on properties all over the place, just completely underutilized. Now, again, I'm not talking about using shipping containers. If you want to, that's great. But that's not the core of what I'm saying. I'm talking about like using prefabricated and module essence of how we design and we think about things. Because the way we implement our models and our construction tactics and the means and methods have to evolve and change. And in Jacksonville's case, we evolved them and we did them very differently so that we could be successful. And at the end of the day, it's a really killer project. It won a bunch of awards and it's pretty fantastic. So we come back to the $20 million deal. And we all seen this thing. So Viatech, does anyone know? Viatechnique, well, whatever. So they shared this graph. And of course, it's courtesy of McKinsey & Company, which is the firm my brother works for. But like the red line is literally the manufacturing world. And the white line or the gray line is construction. Like we all know this. Like every one of these classes say that manufacturing is going up and construction staying dormant, right? Well, the only way we're going to be sustainable in 20 years is if we figure out how to close that gap. So again, gross domestic product is going down. Business sales are going down. Jobs are going down in a traditional sense. But the economy and the opportunities are vast and growing, right? But we're ignoring them. And we're ignoring them because we're afraid of the risk associated with adopting them. We're afraid of performing appropriately, like professionals that we are, architects, engineers, and contractors, and technologists. So I mentioned digital practice. Like, what is digital practice? Does anyone want to tell me what they think digital practice is? Software used for production? Like, I would agree. I would say it would be like implementing technology for, but I don't know. Like, that's what I'm saying. What is it? Is it physically designing digital environments? Is it eliminating paper documents? Like, what is the end goal? Like, what is our product? Like, in historical sense, we're architects building buildings and spaces, and contractors building buildings and spaces. But is that still it? Does it just change? Is the digital practice just the difference of, not using sketch paper and bum wad and models? I don't know, right? So these companies are trying to figure it out. Okay, we already talked about Disney. Does anyone know who PCL is? PCL Construction? So they have a large, I'm not sure if their headquarters in Canada, like predominantly. I think they are, but they have a group called Agile. And Agile is just a plant that they sunk $2 million into a fabrication arm within the contract of the company so that they could prefab and offsite construction stuff. So what's really interesting, and their Agile is in Toronto, what's interesting is the way that we draw stuff, they don't care. Like, they want us to draw stuff the way that they can build it, but what they do is they have a whole group of people who take our drawings, cut them up, and figure out how they can modulate the stuff, right? And then they build them, and they put them on trucks, and they ship them. Okay, so like us, they find efficiencies in that. So to me, it's like, why don't we just listen to that and maybe learn from that and figure out how we can draw our buildings in ways that we can streamline that process. Because quite frankly, a contractor, like, you have to have a good relationship with your contractor, and the contractor has to have a relationship with your architect, and we have to have good relationship with our engineers to have a good product. And if any of that gets botched, we're all screwed, right? Or we're all stressed out unnecessarily. So Skender, anyone know Skender? They're based in Chicago, building construction management company. They have architects, engineers, builders, planners, and financialists on their team. That's all they do. They'll go and they'll just prefab everything. And I'm not talking about bringing a whole pod in and whatnot, but if they have to make that whole back wall and then bring it in the series and do that, they've figured out a way to streamline their process to make their field time better, right? Because if you're not waiting for the civil guy or the site guy to get out of your way before you do your foundations, then if it's done in series and then the foundations are all done, and you come in and drop all your walls in, that's just faster. So Skender spends time and energy, and this is all in the, they do a really great company. I think they made, honestly, I think Skender made like $20 million last year. Profit, like outside of like their overhead and revenue. But Party Shack is a tailgate company. So Party Shack comes in, they build, now they use shipping containers, but they do them very effectively and efficiently. Like you go to so in Jacksonville at Everbank Field, well, TIA Field, they have a football game every year between the Florida Gators and the Bulldogs, the Georgia Bulldogs. And it's like, they call it the world's largest outdoor cocktail party because there happens to be a football game, but it's just like how many people? 100,000, 200,000 people? So they have all of these desires to have food, beverage, concessions, and you can't build a building. It would be irresponsible for you to build a building for an event one time a year, wouldn't it? Like, would we ever build a building for one event a year? So Party Shack goes around and they fabricate buildings and put them together based on the need. 3 stories, 2 stories, with ADA accessibility, elevators, all of it. And of course, Finfrock's one of my favorites, but they're in Orlando, and I think they're only pretty much in Orlando, but they do a lot of hotels for Disney and stuff like that. But of course, our favorite is Marriott. Has everyone heard of Marriott's propaganda and the stuff they're doing? They are building 50 prefabricated hotels in the United States this year. 50. Now, I've had conversations with some of my old colleagues, and people say, well, it's Marriott. It's not high design. Like, we're a design studio. Like, and I'm like, I mean, I go to a Marriott I'm a Marriott and Hilton guy, and I fly every week, and I like it. It's comfortable, but isn't it just their brand, right? Their brand is comfort. Like, their brand, their design, their approach is to provide familiarity with me, or for people like me and other people. So, but they do a lot of great stuff. And now they're building it's in here a little bit later, I think it's how big is it? 26-story building, prefab hotel, and it's really high design. And the point is, it's like the people who aren't thinking about cutting up the building differently or your process differently. It's not design, bid, build. It's not see them at risk and architect. Like, we have to find a way to work better together. So that's what we're really trying to talk about here. So, here's some of the companies, right? Here's some of the software. Katera, Project Frog. Has anyone heard of Project Frog? That's within, it's all, generative design, and like we talk about that all. This is not that kind of class. But Blockable and Plant Prefab, these are companies that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars just to advance our profession. And they're doing really good stuff, right? Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side of the table you're at, a lot of it's, because they're following the Marriott brand, right? So a lot of it's really kind of cookie cutter still. And, but, Shop Architects, does anyone know who Shop is in New York? They did a module building, right? But if you think about, again, I'm trying to be really explicit about prefab and offsite and module. It's all different. Like, they're different concepts. You could prefab anything, right? You could offsite anything. I could build this very room as we see it, aside from high design or not, in a factory and bring it in 3 pieces and be done with it, right? As opposed to having a bunch of, the sub-market is hard to get, right? It's hard to get good laborers now, right? So if you can do that in a controlled environment, why wouldn't we consider it, right? Why wouldn't we consider building something in a controlled environment where it's safer, where it's affectionately, or where it's just more efficient, right? So these companies are trying to do that. So full stack is a pretty good one, right? So again, here's another word we hear a lot: disruption, right? So as a human being, I'm a disruptor, and he's known me for 20-something years. Am I a disruptor? I'm a disruptor. I'm loud. I'm obnoxious. I'm everything. And that's why I care, because we have to disrupt this process, and we have to do it in a way that's fun, right? So again, back to my brothers about the outsourcing thing. In 2013, he said everybody's going to be a robot. And he's fucking right. We have robots building houses in China. We have robots from Boston doing backflips, right? We have robots building furniture. right? Like, super simple, but proof of concept, right? Like, if we don't pay attention to these tools, then we're just gonna keep just going down a dark path, right? And 20 frustration-free minutes. There's a video I tried to find. I told my wife, I said, send me that video when I was putting that crib together. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So when I was putting together a crib, it took me like 6 hours to put this crib together. And I swear I dropped every F word and every other word putting that thing together because it was just painstaking. But with sensors, I don't know if anyone went to the technology in the future technology class a couple, yeah, you were there, definitely. And he was talking about sensors. There's sensors all at the galore. They can sense anything. They can see anything. They can respond to that, and they can plan for it. So plan and control the steps, right? And so Boston Mechanics, we talked about, they're trying to create robots that can do things that we wouldn't think they can do. I don't have a video of it, but like literally these things are like doing backflips. They're controlling their balance. They're reacting to, a ball rolling across the floor with sensors. And so why can't we do that? So Batchel's doing that, right? Everyone flies drones. I'm willing to bet that how many people have ordered something on Amazon and it showed up like 12 hours later? Has anyone done that? I ordered something. I just moved to Tampa, as I said. And I ordered something, and I ordered at 10 o'clock at night, and I swear it was on my doorstep by 10 o'clock the next day. And I told my wife, I said, I think they brought it here on a drone. Like, how could it possibly be getting there? But project monitoring, safer, more consistent, more concise, and forward thinking, right? So what's forward thinking? Tomorrow, what's tomorrow? 50th anniversary of us on the moon, allegedly. I'm just saying, like, I'm pretty sure the flag wouldn't be waving in outer space, right? So Buzz Aldrin swears that he won't swear in the Bible that happened for sure. But that's 50 years ago tomorrow, July 20th, 1969. You know what happened last couple months?
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.
NASA's no longer, right? So SpaceX and privatized space travel, SpaceX, Elon Musk's primary business. Mars is the part that he has just a cool old-fashioned FU to the government. Saying that I can make a cool, sustainable car, right? But his company is SpaceX. How many people are familiar with SpaceX?
Here comes the fairing separation, and there
Do you
it
know
goes.
what SpaceX does? They land their rockets on in the ocean. They reuse the fuel cells. They reuse the boosters. They reuse the equipment. And it's like, he's a lunatic. Like, I promise, he's a lunatic. But lunatics do that, right? Like, he in 50 years, somebody had enough gall to think outside the box, forget what they're doing, and do something radically different. And he's changed the world. Now we got the Hyperloop and Neuralink. So how about this? Do you think prefab is a new idea? How many people think prefabrication is new in the last 20 years? 5 years. How old do you think it is? Okay. I wasn't going back that far, but that's a fair point. How about you, Andrew? How old do you think it is?
It depends how you want to define prefab. You can go, say, boom of suburbia, post-war. Those are all prefab homes.
Okay.
For the most part, if you want to use that as a definition.
So it's been around a long time, right? So why are we not listening? Why are we not growing from it? How come we haven't adopted it or elevated our practice around it? Here's a video. This blows me away. I love it every time. It's 3 minutes, but bear with me.
When you and your family visit Walt Disney World in Florida, come, stay.
Oh, it's all the way up.
A spectacular hotel. It's one of two that United States Steel helped plan and build here.
You probably
But this
can't
is
hear.
more than a hotel. It's a prototype of a whole new way to build.
See?
And we're involved. Everything about it is striking. But most unusual is the way the rooms were made. Instead of being built in place, the rooms for this hotel were assembled in a nearby factory by our American Bridge Division. First came a steel frame, then a floor of poured concrete, wall panels from our USS Holmes Division, Next, the ceiling with air conditioning built right in. Then wall covering, a complete bath, even sliding doors. When the units leave the factory, they're trucked to the site and fitted into this 14-story frame like drawers into a chest. We're confident that schools, hospitals, and other structures will soon be built this revolutionary way. We not only supplied the structural steel, the cement and the foundations came from our Universal Atlas Cement division. So come, stay at this unique hotel, a remarkable place inside and
Because
out.
that's where Disney started
We're
with their
finding new ways to
prefab
build.
stuff, right? Like
At
they used-
United
they
States
used
Steel,
steel
we're
USS
involved.
was part of the steel world. So basically you had cruise ship design. And cruise ship design, predominantly in Europe, has prefab and offsite componentry to it, module components, where they build everything in parts and pieces, right? They literally build an estate room upside down because it's easier for the tradesmen and tradespeople to put pipe and ductwork down as opposed to leaning up. Then they use robotics to take the cruise ship, the rooms, they flip them over and plug them in like a drawer, just like Disney did in 1971. And then you got PCL Construction, Terry, a good friend of mine. They have that plant in Toronto called Agile, and they're trying to just figure out a way. That video happens to be talking about shipping containers because that's what's abundant and relative, right? And then you have companies like FC Module down in the bottom left who are using labor and union workers, and they figured out a way to dispel the whole thing like, well, prefab doesn't work in the union market. Yes, it does, because they do it every day. And then in the top right corner, Skender built a condominium building. I don't know what happened to the video. But, so you have Skender in California, you have FC Module in California and New York, and then you have the cruise ship industry. Every cruise ship is built in the same critique. Has everyone been on a cruise ship? Not Carnival, because that does not count. Just kidding. Actually, I don't like Carnival. It's not a good experience. But Royal Caribbean is, right? So high design, high experience. So for me, it's exploratory. So I've had a lot of opposition in this, okay? And I'd lie to you to tell you that all of my bosses thought this was a great idea, okay? Because I would be lying if I said that. There's a lot of opposition because there's a fundamental difference between making money and being sustainable. I don't care what anyone says, that's true. And I'm not talking about that. But for me, those guys asking me to try to come up with an idea that would be sustainable and profitable and proper experience and provide them with a proper venue to house an emerging market, which is, in this case, soccer. Soccer in this country is blowing up. And in the next 10 years, the World Cup's coming in 2026, there are going to be a lot of these needs. And it's not responsible to build $120, $150 million buildings in every city just because you can, right? Because we pay for that. Most of the time, it's taxpayer money, 100% of the time. Okay, 98% of the time. So for me, 1904 says to us in San Diego, they said, build us a building, how cheap can we get? Cheap meaning affordable. I shouldn't have said that. So for me, it starts, and for Populous, I was at Populous when I did this. See my disclaimer at the top, denotes project experience at a previous company. Is creative, this is what happens, right? Create a fan experience, encourage development around and surrounding, ancillary development, complement a district, create brand visibility and marketability, add value to the community, and support construction of a new infrastructure. So this is a rendering that we did of 1904, a 10,000 seat soccer stadium, 100% module and prefab and offsite. It's got flights, it's got fabric PTFE canopies, it's got locker rooms, and it's got every accoutrement that a soccer stadium would have. And I would argue it looks pretty cool, right? So, well, of course I would argue that I designed it, right? So it's 145,000 square feet of program. So how do you do that? So I already talked about, like, how do you think about your program, design it and draw it and develop it and model it in the sense that a fabricator, an FC Module or a Banker Steel, can take it, harvest it, use it, and then give it back to you or build directly from it. So for us, it was a matter of taking the traditional elements that we like in sports architecture. You have experience, you have clubs, you have areas that you can get a drink and still watch soccer. You have, group terraces, you have shade. And you have all these things that are 100% transferable. So we lay them out. And with our builder at this time, which is GL Events, which was a portable, they do pods and they do prefabrication and modular construction. This is the first diagram we did of all the parts and spaces. I won't bore you, but basically you have yellow is concessions, blue is restrooms, green or the greenish color are support spaces, and then the green up top are the locker rooms. So what we do is I basically just design the building in series of what all the parts and pieces, that 145,000 square foot of space, and then I cut it up. But I was mindful, I didn't just draw it and design it with all the stuff. I thought about, all right, if they gave me, now in this case illustrated as an 8 by 20 module, 8 foot wide, 20 feet long, 15 feet tall. That's the module that we picked because that was the most cost effective. So how can I build a locker room using these modules? So in the bottom right corner, basically is a culmination of 16 8 by 20 modules methodically thought about and choreographed so that they could build their space and basically just cut it in half, and I have everything I have. I got my 32 lockers, I have my hydrotherapy tubs, I got my coaches' offices, I got everything I want in parts and pieces. So to be clear, like the whole locker room is one contiguous space built in 4 pieces. Because at the end of the day, you just need 4 posts, a floor, and a roof, right? And you don't even need the roof per se, you just need the frame around it. And you have a lot of luxuries and flexibilities, and they don't have to be 8 by 20, and they don't have to be 15 feet tall. It's just wherever your fabricator or your supplier is giving you. So in fairness, how big is a semi-truck? 53 feet, right? And how many times have you seen a big old bridge going down the road? And it's not 53 feet, it's like 72 feet, and they drive it down at midnight. Right? There's permitting. So you're not limited to an 8 by 20 by 15. It's just people are limited because they're not thinking about it. Right? I told you about the St. Johns River in Jacksonville. We could have floated that whole 165-foot truss fully assembled down the St. Johns River. We could have done it. Now our problem was between the St. Johns River and the site was an elevated freeway. So we couldn't get under the freeway. Okay? So there, we had to think about that. So here's this is the exact same program of a locker room complex that Orlando City Soccer Stadium has, which was a $120 million plus job, done in each one of these pods. PCL priced it for us, was $10,000 bucks. 16 pods at 10 grand a piece. Like it's amazing. So how do you do a roof? Well, you think about it differently. You think about it in pods, you think about it in series, you think about repetition. We had 4 different roof panels. That whole picture of that whole roof is 4 panels, repeated. We worked with Structure Flex, which is a fabric and contractor. So they are a supplier and contractor. And they signed up to do the engineer of record. So design assist, everyone's heard that term before, right? Because that's what we're talking about, delegated design, right? And it's not like giving up roles and responsibility. It's just giving up the mundane tasks of in between, right? You don't need to do that. I don't think you do. I mean, I don't. So we have 4 panels repeated. They build them. With the shape, the length, the width, the size, we're all planned so that Structure Flex could build them in their factory in Kansas City and take them to San Diego and erect them and install them. So then you get these pieces, right? You get the fabric, you get the canopies, you get the experiences, you get the branding, you get it all right. In sports and entertainment, if you go to an event, I don't care what it is. It could be a concert, it could be a recital, it could be a karate thing. It doesn't matter. Whatever you go to, and if it sucks the first time, will you go back? You won't go back. And for these teams trying to emerge into a market and create a brand, they deserve something that is meaningful and responsible. Okay, so then back to the design motif thing. I can't tell you how many times I heard my people say, well, we're not Marriott. That's not high design. Have you ever been in a suite? They're pretty fucking typical. They're 12 by 24, and they have a bar, a counter, and a Mitsubishi unit in the roof, and they have glass, and you look out onto the pitch. So this is a suite in Orlando City. And then I mentioned Party Shack. So these are their little mods. And that's inside one of the Party Shack. You know, it's like you can have it. You just think about it differently, right? And you engage your sub-consultants and your fabricators and your manufacturers differently. And you don't have to go all out. You don't have to do it all. Here's the Marriott situation I was just talking about. 26 stories. This just hit the news the other day, like yesterday, I think. I mean, that's a hotel room, and I get it. Okay, it's a hotel room. It's a Marriott, Courtyard Marriott, whatever, you know. But it's got high ceilings. The sprinklers are incorporated. You know, the HVAC is hidden. The plumbing works. Like it's proof that they can do it. And the picture on the right is the skin, all self-contained. The envelope is enclosed. You get to dry in faster. Our clients deserve that. So this is what we presented to the city of Oceanside, California for 1904, because they didn't understand the prefab thing. And a lot of it's education. So no differently than any of your projects, you always have to educate and include them. So here we're like, okay, here's what we're talking about. Here's the parts and pieces, right? And this is how it's going to get delivered, how one pod becomes 3 pods and 3 pods become a suite. Comes with packaged furniture, like wrapped up, like saran wrapped and bolted, and then you come out, you load it, and you unpack it. Right? It can work with anything. We could literally do this room. So again, here's some adaptable module. And so the building in the middle is a European soccer training academy. So it's got like, you know, locker room. It's adjacent to a field. It's you know, it is what it is. And I've done quite a few soccer training facilities and football training facilities, and they're not extensive. They're very utilitarian, and they are there to serve a function of training. So in this case, Module K built a whole soccer compound using prefabricated off-site construction. And it's not a shipping container. It is literally welded steel cages at a certain with proper concrete floors and ceramic tile and gypboard and ceiling tiles and all of the stuff, right? And then, of course, you have the location thing, which leads into faster, quicker, and more efficient and safer. So, faster. It's almost like I wrote this. So here's a schedule. And this is just for fun facts, because this is something that I had to try to rationalize, because I had to test it myself, right? I had to ask myself actual questions. So in a traditional sense, if I was to design a small 10,000-seat soccer stadium, and if I was to invite my partners at ME and Walter P. Moore, it would take us 2 years to build it, to draw it and build it. That's about what it would take. Being responsible and efficient and very methodical about it, right? In a traditional bricks and sticks, you have a civil guy, you do the geotech stuff, you do that blah, 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 blah. In a modular situation, you can do it in a year. People building these things, and Marriott's doing a 26-story thing in 90 days. And it's because the overlap, your works overlap. While you're clearing the site, right? While the civil person's doing the site, you're fabricating units, you're fabricating roof panels, you're fabricating wall panels. You're doing all of that at the same time. And then when the site gets done, you drop everything in place, right? And you put it together. So in theory, that's kind of why it's faster, because you don't have to wait for one tradesperson to get off the site before the next person comes in. And I've been on a lot of projects where my plumber can't get in because the concrete guy's not done. And my electrician, the guy or gal who is always the last person, and they can't do anything because all the other stuff's not done. Where all of this stuff is done systematically in a factory or in some off-site location and done in order and series. This you can't read it, which is regretful because I put a lot of effort into this. But this is the time, and I'll share this if anyone wants it. But this is the roles and responsibility matrix. So this is the thing. It's like, okay, who does what? What does ME do, or what does Walter P. Moore do? What does Populous do? What does O Sports do? What does Hunt Brady do? What does who do? Right? And it really becomes that you have the architect, the contractor, and the fabricator all doing the same stuff, like in series. So the fabricator is my consultant, right? The fabricator is part of the team. And you can have a contractual conversation about who pays them and when they pay them, but that's for a different thing. But the fact is, when I started going through project planning, you have in project plan in the top left, I'm not gonna read all this because I'm running out of time, but define construction schedule. And in the roles and responsibilities, the fabricator is part of that conversation, right? In association with the contractor. Now, when I say fabricator, I'm blanket statement, like it could be any sub-trade component, right? It could be anyone who's doing anything as part of the project that could be done in series. It could be the mechanical guys, it could be the foundation guys, because foundations still have to be treated the same way. Although I saw a cool video of a robot printing foundations, so there's that. So you remember the London Underground map? So here's like taking a different, if we streamline our efforts in our conversations, you have the owner and the J, the O, J, and jurisdiction. Orange line is direct relationships. And then all the lines, those are communication strands from each of the entities. It's the same concept as what we did, but it's thinking about it and packaging it different so that it becomes more linear. Now, I'm not a linear thinker, but in the sense of progression and innovation, you have to be linear about what the objective is. And in this case, it's streamlining our conversations. And what it does is it negates design, bid, build, construction manager at risk, integrated project delivery, and design build. I don't give a shit about any of those things because all I care about is good architecture and a good project, right? And if we find a way to stop using those terms because they're contractual lawyer stuff, and I get it, that's that's going to take years. But Jacksonville's a perfect example that two amazing companies, well, five, because you had Populous, you had Walter P. Moore, you had Banker Steel, you had Hunt Construction, and the Jaguars. We all bought into it. So if they all bought into it and we all made money, mostly, then why couldn't it work for our smaller projects and our smaller endeavors? So again, have fun. And if anything we do, you have to continue to be creative and forward-thinking and open-minded. And it starts with buying your kid a prefabricated model Lego kit. Like, it's mainstream. And that's all I got. So I think I have like 4 minutes. So I didn't think I was going to take the whole time. But does anyone have comments, questions, or want to talk about anything? If not, in the spirit of Phil, our keynote, I'm also hiring. Did everyone notice he had that in his bottom left corner of his presentation? Yeah.
I got a question. I'm just curious. In my experience of prefabrication was a hotel project where we were looking at prefabricated restrooms to go in the hotel. There was only really a couple of companies that could provide it. Oldcastle was the one that we were looking at. And it was priced, and yeah, there's a lot of schedule savings and all that. But I think because there's a limited number of options of sources out there, their price was very high compared to stick-built construction. And there was that whole balance of ultimately the client decided not to go forward with that. Looking at your examples of kind of prefabrication, for structure, like the boxes, having a frame, any fabricator can really prefabricate a frame. If you're talking about a complete unit of a locker room, finishes and all that, is there enough suppliers out there that can do that?
So the answer is yes. So we're just not thinking. There's a whole conference in Florida called the World of Modular. And like I've been to it one time and no one's heard of it. And when I went last year, there was literally 24 different companies just on the East Coast that specialized in it. It was FC Module, you have Module K. There are a lot of companies that do it. Shift Space, Finfroc's in Orlando, they do it. There are a lot of companies that do it. And it's just being open-minded to think about it. I challenge you, Google prefabricate, call modular contractors, and Google will give you at least 50 of them. Now, to that point, if I'm doing a project in San Diego, I can't leverage and expect to have efficiencies if I'm finding Module K out in Boston. Do you know what I mean? Like, you have to find them that are close. But there are surprisingly a lot of them. But more so, it's companies like PCL who are recreating their process, right? Hoare Construction, who is also in Orlando, is thinking they do a lot of hospitals, right, or whatnot, and they do all the head walls that way. So I think it's grown to be an option. I mean, you definitely have 3 or 4 options in any region you're at, and I would argue that's as many options as we get when we solicit bids from any other trade. So, yeah.
Question. So, going off your San Diego 1904 project, you've done a lot of work into creating modular components to prefab the site, keep costs down. But do those types of projects have in it the logic to scale upwards on site? You know, one where you may not need a 10,000 seat stadium right now, you only need 4, but in 3 seasons, you got to come back and put a second deck on, or, you know, the popularity takes off, I need that thing to get up to 16,000 or 20,000. How do you guys incorporate that type of thinking into your project work?
So that's a great question, because 100% of the time the conversation starts with, well, I only need like 5,000 seats now, but I want to get to like 12,000 seats. And then even in the MLS, Major League Soccer, when we're doing a traditional building, they're always like, well, let's do 18,000, but we want to be able to go to 25. So it happens with program allocations, with building the corners of the seating bowl and predominantly the east side seating bowl to be malleable, to be able to be taken down and rebuilt or moved or repurposed. So a lot of times it happens in the corners, and because that's space it becomes on San Diego, it was just open decks, where in a couple of years, if it went off, like what we do is we would deconstruct the decks and then build seats in the corners. And in fact, when we did Orlando City Soccer Stadium, it was the same way. We started with 4 open corners, and then they played in a football stadium in Orlando, and they were getting 60,000 people going. And the ownership group was like, why are we only doing 18,000? We need to get up to maximize this thing. So we filled in the corners, right? So it predominantly happens in corner infill and enlarging the east grandstands. Because the east grandstands in sports is traditionally one of the lower tier tickets, because you put the premium seats on the west side because it's under shade and the sun doesn't get you, and the suites are over there. So you can usually build and increase it there. So it happens in all of them, and it's important. Anything else? Okay, well, I hope it was meaningful and it was entertaining, and I appreciate you coming. All right.